You'll stand at the edge of a broken dream, listening to the echo of trust turning to ash, before the first chord of betrayal shatters everything. When shadows steal the melody. My name is Elena, and I never imagined the person I trusted with my songs could pull the rug out from under me. I still see the glow of the studio lights that night, warm and inviting, like they were cheering me on. I slid the USB drive across the polished wood desk toward Mark, my producer and mentor. Months of late nights and endless rewrites were stored on that small silver stick, every lyric I'd bled onto paper, every melody that felt like part of my soul. His reflection in the glass window flickered beside mine, promising belief in my talent. I wanted to believe it too. When he pressed play, I sat on the edge of my seat, heart fluttering. The speakers filled the room with my voice, soft and trembling at first, then strong and sure as the song built. Mark nodded, eyes bright. "This is incredible," he said, voice low. I forced a grin, though my throat had gone dry, my hands slick around the armrest. I told myself it was nerves, the usual jitters before sharing something deeply personal. But even as I smiled, a flicker of unease coiled in my chest. Over the next few days, Mark and I worked relentlessly. He suggested subtle tweaks to the arrangement, whispered encouragement as I fumbled through vocal takes, and once, after a perfect chorus run, clapped so hard I thought my heart might burst. That night, I went home buzzing with excitement. I couldn't stop replaying our session in my mind. I fell asleep imagining my name in the lights, my songs on airwaves. But the next morning, my inbox held a message that felt like an ice pick between the ribs. Subject: contract offer for E. Johnson. No mention of Elena Petrova. No credit for me. The song titles matched exactly, every bridge, every verse, but the document listed Mark as co-writer and E. Johnson as lead artist. My breath caught, chest tightening. I stared until words swam, vision blurring, then grabbed my coat and fled to the studio. The door swung open with a hiss of guilt. Mark sat behind the console, laptop open, its screen dim. His back was to me. I dropped my bag to the floor, concrete hard beneath my palms. "What is this?" I hissed, voice shaking. He turned, expression blank for a heartbeat before polite calm slid over his face. "Elena," he said, tone gentle, too gentle. "I thought you knew." My nails dug into my palms. "Knew what?" He shrugged as if shrugging off a guilty thought. It made sense. "You trust me." The silence that followed was colder than any winter wind. I could feel my blood pounding in my ears, each beat a warning. My legs trembled and I gripped the desk so tight my knuckles blanched. "You stole my work," I managed, voice raw. He leaned back, folding arms, as if defending a point rather than admitting betrayal. "I salvaged what we needed," he said, eyes distant. "I had to." Rage and humiliation flared beneath my skin, hot and wild. I realized then that the man who'd been my champion had plotted my downfall from the start. I bolted from the studio into the gray dawn, heart hammering like a drum roll before a final act. Tears stung my eyes, taste of salt and ash. Every step felt surreal, like walking through a dream that had twisted into a nightmare. I reached the riverbank and collapsed onto the cold concrete ledge, shoulders heaving. The water flowed below with indifferent grace, reflecting the cloudy sky. I slid to the edge until my fingers just brushed the surface, trembling. Betrayal had never felt so sharp, so real. My phone buzzed with messages from Sarah, my roommate and closest friend. I deleted them without reading. I didn't want comforting words, I wanted the world to know what he'd done. In that moment, I vowed I would reclaim my voice, no matter the cost. As the sun rose pale and chill, I stood, knees weak but spirit ignited. The river of my life had veered into dark territory, but I was determined to navigate it, to find the source of my strength and unleash a reckoning powerful enough to silence the shadows once and for all. Those nights after that revelation were impossible. I lay awake, the stain of betrayal pressing against my ribs like a stone, each breath a reminder that I had been fooled. Sleep felt dangerous, a dark sea where nightmares pooled around me, visions of my songs playing in someone else's voice, my name erased from every lyric. I'd wake with my heart pounding, sweat chilling on my skin, and the tremor in my hands would follow me into dawn. I tried to focus on routine, rehearse scales, jot new lyrics, boil water for tea. But every task became a trial. I'd press my palms to the piano keys and the memory of that USB drive would flash behind my eyes, white hot. My muscles tensed until my shoulders hovered near my ears, and a dull ache settled behind my eyes. Even brushing my teeth felt intrusive, the taste of mint clashed with the ash in my mouth. I reached out to Sarah more than once. The first time, I stared at my phone for minutes before calling. When she answered, her voice was soft, like a lifeline. "Elena?" she asked, concern bleeding through the line. "I can't breathe right," I choked out, vision blurring. She stayed on the phone with me, 2 floors below, until my breathing slowed. Her calm was a tether, but once I hung up, the void yawned again. A few days later, I bit the bullet and went back to the studio, under the pretense of retrieving my old notebooks. I slipped inside during a quiet afternoon, heart thudding like a desperate drum. The familiar tang of coffee and cables hit me, and my stomach lurched. I made my way to Mark's console, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my bag. I rifled through drawers until I found my discarded notebooks, each page a relic of my trust. Ink smudged under my fingertips reminded me of his fingerprints on that Polaroid. My mouth went dry, and I swallowed against a lump that threatened to choke me. I tucked the notebooks under my arm and bolted, as though the walls themselves might collapse on me. Back in my apartment, I spread the notebooks across the table and thumbed through every page. I was hunting for proof, something legal, undeniable. The scribbles in the margins, the date stamps on file drafts, conversations saved in track metadata. My heart would sink when a scrap of evidence turned out to be inconclusive, then soar when digital timestamps aligned with my rehearsal logs. I watched the clock tick past midnight, lit only by my desk lamp. The silence was loud, my mind filled every gap with the echo of his lies. Out of desperation, I recorded myself reading the notebook entries, my voice tight with fury and fear, and saved the audio as a hidden file. The rasp of my own tone crackled through the speakers, raw and vulnerable. I paused the recording and stared at my reflection in the laptop screen, pale, hollowed, engaged in a war over my own identity. I hit save and opened my inbox, drafting an anonymous message to a music blogger, attached, proof of plagiarism, screenshots, audio excerpt. My fingers hovered over send, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. Then I deleted the draft. I wasn't ready for that storm. Instead, I printed everything and assembled a physical dossier, photocopies of the contract alterations, Polaroid with his fingerprint circled in red ink, page scans of hidden metadata. Each sheet laid on the table felt like a brick building toward justice or ruin. My shoulders burned under the weight of it all. I reclined in my chair, rubbing my jaw until it unlocked. In the stale room, the only sound was my ragged breathing. Late that night, I finally texted Sarah a photo of the dossier. Within seconds, her reply pinged, "Meet me tomorrow. 10 a.m. Cafe by the river." Relief hit me like a wave. I packed the papers into a slim folder, tapped shut with trembling fingers. For the first time in days, a plan existed outside my head. When morning came, I showed up early at the cafe, still shaky but determined. The river's water gleamed in soft daylight, reflecting my own frayed reflection back at me. Sarah arrived with 2 coffees and a sympathetic smile. We spread the dossier between us and went through each piece, her sharp eyes catching details I'd missed in my blind fury. She asked the questions that clarified my rage into strategy. What do you want his world to look like when this is over? What are you willing to risk? How much of yourself can you give to the fight? As we talked, the knot in my chest loosened into a coil of resolve. Betrayal had cut me open, but it had also forced me to find every hidden corner of my courage. When I walked home that afternoon, the dossier clutched against my side, I felt the first stirrings of purpose, raw and bright, like a new melody demanding to be sung. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the city's muted hum drifting through the cracked window. Steam curled from my mug, but I couldn't taste the warmth. My mind replayed every detail of the dossier laid out on that cafe table. My fingers itched to act, to send the evidence hurtling into the public eye, but I needed to be sure. I closed my eyes and felt the knot in my stomach, the same tight coil that had constricted when Mark's name popped up on my phone. My hands trembled as I reached for my laptop. I opened a blank draft email and hesitated. Then I attached the 2 pieces of proof I trusted above all. Proof number 1, screenshot of the altered contract email. A crisp, rectangular image showing Mark's message to the label, dated, contract offer, with my song titles identical but credits reassigned. My heart leapt as I scrolled through the lines. Lead artist, E. Johnson. Co-writer, Mark Hartley. Royalties, 100% to Hartley. I remembered how my chest had gone cold when those words first appeared, how my fingers had gone numb as I hit reply without knowing what to say. Even now, seeing that forged email made my vision blur, and I pressed a palm to my mouth to stifle a shaky breath. Proof number 2, Polaroid from our first studio night. I dragged a small JPEG of a Polaroid onto the email. In the photo, Mark and I stood side by side, beaming at the camera, genuine excitement lighting his eyes. In the corner, his fingerprint smudged the white border, a silent signature on what should have been my memory alone. I stared at that image until the edges seemed to wobble, the memory of how I discovered the smudge, lifting the photo to the light, slowing my breath, hit me in the throat like a stone. With both attachments loaded, I addressed the email to a prominent indie music blogger whose exposés had toppled far less damaging scams. My fingers hovered over the send button as the weight of everything pressed down, the months of trust, the stolen melodies, the broken promises. I took a long, shaky breath and clicked. Seconds later, my inbox pinged with automated replies. One from the blogger, thanks for the tip, will review. Another from a legal advisor reminding me not to publish libel. My heart pounded as I closed the laptop and sank back in my chair. The room spun, and I had to grip the table edge to keep from sliding to the floor. Over the next hours, I moved through my apartment in a daze. My legs carried me from the sofa to the piano, where I pressed a single key and let the note linger. My hands shook so badly I nearly knocked over my coffee. The tremor wasn't fear anymore, it was prelude, adrenaline before the storm. I paced, each footstep echoing, throat dry, every breath measured. By late afternoon, my phone vibrated with a new email. The blogger wanted an on-the-record interview. I stared at the subject line, your story, request for more info, and felt a surge of triumph so fierce I tasted iron. My vision blurred, and tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. I pressed my palms flat against the cool wood of the table and closed my eyes, willing my breath to steady. The fear that I'd be silenced, sued, or laughed at quivered in my mind, but beneath it was something louder, relief. My truth was out. That evening, I met the blogger at a quiet coffee shop by the river. Under the dim lights, I watched her scroll through the attachments on her tablet, nodding as she tapped notes into her phone. My chest tightened with every glance she cast my way, part curiosity, part empathy. When she finally looked up, her expression was solemn. "This is damning," she said softly. "I've never seen such clear evidence. Your voice will be heard." My pulse thundered as I let the words settle. A few tables away, I imagined Mark pacing in some sterile office, blinds drawn, facing the fallout. I left the cafe in the pale glow of streetlights, the river beside me flowing dark and unflinching. My reflection shimmered on the water's surface, fragile and trembling. I ran a hand through my hair, heart still pounding. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a shift, like the tide turning beneath my feet. I'd taken back control, weaponized the truth. By the time I reached home, my phone buzzed with texts, fellow musicians offering support, industry insiders asking questions, friends sending virtual hugs. Each message was a pulse of solidarity, easing the ache deep in my chest. I sank into my armchair, laptop open, and watched the first draft of the blogger's post go live. The headline read, "Composer's Shocking Betrayal, How Trust Became Theft." I read the opening lines, breath catching at the words that mirrored my own voice. When your life's work is stolen, the wound runs deeper than any public defeat. Elena Petrova's story reminds us how fragile trust can be, and how fierce the fight to reclaim it. My eyes filled with tears, but they weren't only sorrow, they were fierce with the promise of justice. I closed my laptop and covered my face, letting the emotion flood through, rage, relief, and a strange, budding hope. Outside, the river continued its endless course, but I no longer felt adrift. I'd sent my truth downstream, and now I would watch it reach every shore. My heartbeat rattled like loose screws as the first wave of reactions crashed onto my anonymous post. You know that moment when you send out a message into the void and then freeze, convinced you've just unleashed a storm you can't control? That was me, fists clenched, jaw locked, every muscle primed as the comments lit up with outrage and disbelief. Fellow artists tagged me in reposts, strangers offered digital shoulder taps, and one comment, just 3 words, made my chest clench: "We believe you." It felt like a lifeline, but also like a gauntlet thrown at Mark's feet. I watched the studio's facade through my cafe window, the one across the street, pretending to sketch new lyrics in my notebook. Every time the door opened, I flinched, heart squeezing, imagining it was him coming out to confront me. I could taste tension in the air, metallic and thick, as if the very city was holding its breath. My pen hovered, then slammed down onto the page, ink smudged by the tremble in my hand. Even though the evidence was public, part of me still worried I'd made a mistake. The dry lump in my throat reminded me that trust, once shattered, never mends the same way. Over the next few days, the industry's undercurrent rippled. Anonymous tipsters messaged record execs, sending screenshots of my contract comparisons. A small blog picked up the story, then a mid-tier music forum. Every share was both triumph and torment, triumph because the truth was out, torment because each repost felt like reopening a wound that still throbbed. I could feel my shoulders knotting tighter with every notification ping. My neck ached as though I'd slept doubled over, and my eyes burned from staring at screens for hours. Then came the cease and desist notice, Mark's lawyers claiming defamation. I read it through a haze of rage and fear, fingers trembling so violently I spilled half a glass of water across my notes. My reflection in the laptop screen looked feral, dark circles, wild hair, lips pressed into a thin line. The notice threatened legal action if I didn't remove every trace of my accusations within 24 hours. Panic flared in my chest, but beneath it, a cooler flame of defiance stoked itself. I refused to back down. The weight in my gut twisted into resolve. If this was going to court, I'd fight with every shred of proof I'd gathered. My lawyer's voice was calm over the phone, her words deliberate like measured beats in a drum. "We prepared to countersue," she said, outlining strategy, subpoenas for original session logs, depositions from studio assistants, forensic handwriting analysis. My stomach churned imagining Mark sweating under scrutiny. But then came the cost estimate. My chest tightened again. Justice, it seemed, had a price tag heavier than the debts he'd racked up. I sighed, the tension in my shoulders easing fractionally as I realized that even a partial victory might bankrupt me. Still, I steeled myself. I wouldn't let fear make me fold. Late that night, I found myself back in the studio, drawn like a moth to a flame. It was empty, just the hum of standby lights and the faint scent of stale coffee. I walked the perimeter, fingertips grazing the mixer's edge, the desks worn with grain familiar yet poisoned by betrayal. In the silence, I pressed record on my phone, capturing ambient noise, the click of switches, the hum of wires. Evidence, yes, but also a monument to what we'd built together before it was razed. My breath came out in shallow bursts, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. I left the building on trembling legs and wandered until the city lights blurred. In a quiet park corner, I unfolded a blanket of evidence across the grass: contracts, emails, photos, recordings. Under the pale glow of a street lamp, I sorted them into stacks, each one a chapter in his deceit. My fingers traced the edges of the Polaroid again, and I felt the faint ridges of his fingerprint pressed into the paper. As I stacked the last item, the lawyer's words echoed: "Prepare, but be ready for fallout." When I finally packed everything away, the sky had lightened to a bruised gray. I folded my arms across my chest, shivering despite the mild air. The struggle wasn't over, it was entering its most volatile phase. Ahead lay courtroom battles, media storms, potential ruin. Yet beneath the dread, a new rhythm pulsed, a fierce, determined beat that matched my own. The melody of revenge was shifting, building toward its climactic crescendo, and I knew I was ready to conduct it to its bitter end. I sat in the waiting room with my evidence folder clutched against my lap, the city's hum leaking through the glass doors like an accusing whisper. My palms were slick, heart slack one moment and pounding the next. Lawyers in crisp suits passed by, noses buried in their phones or files, but each silhouette felt like Mark himself, watching, waiting. I tried to steady my breathing, inhale for 3, exhale for 5, but my chest tightened as soon as I tried. When they finally called my name, I rose on unsteady legs. The hallway lights stretched long shadows behind me, like the weight of every late-night scrawl, every furious scan of documents, trailing my steps. In the courtroom, the air was cool and sterile, an antiseptic contrast to the roiling heat in my veins. I perched on the witness stand and glanced at the gallery, empty chairs, save for my lawyer at the table and a lone assistant scribbling notes. Mark's side was absent too, but I felt his presence there, hidden in the empty seats, a specter I'd summoned. My lawyer's voice was calm as she began, "If it pleases the court, we call Elena Petrova." I swallowed, throat dry as sand. My last name sounded strange, distant, like someone else's. I pressed both hands to the edges of the stand. My knuckles went white. When I spoke, my voice shook, but I forced it steady. "My name is Elena Petrova," I said, and the microphone caught the tremor I tried to mask. They asked me to describe my relationship with Mark. I hesitated, recalling the first time he'd leaned close, promising stardom, the electric spark in his eyes. "He was my producer," I began. "I trusted him completely." My voice cracked on that word. I felt a hot prickling behind my eyes, but I blinked it back. Every syllable felt like a note on a score I was determined not to misplay. When they presented the crumpled Polaroid, I saw Mark's lawyer shift in his seat, lips thinning. The image was projected on a screen, me laughing, his arm around me, genuine joy in both our faces. Then a close-up, his fingerprint in the corner. I'd practiced saying it a dozen times. I recognized his print immediately, because he'd handled that photo while coaching me on stage presence. My voice caught on, immediately, but I pressed on. He used that print to forge my signature on internal archives, then destroyed the originals. Next, they showed the side-by-side contract pages. I leaned forward, heart swinging. "These are my original drafts, and this is the version he submitted," I said, pointing. I watched the judge's gaze flick from one page to the next, then to me. My pulse roared as I explained each altered clause, royalties, credits, my name erased. At one point, my lawyer asked about the late-night studio break-ins. I admitted I'd returned alone, fearful he'd delete everything. I described the numeric code I'd overheard him mutter and how I'd used it to access his locker. I retrieved notebooks where he'd crossed out my lyrics and labeled them for E. Johnson, I said, eyes flicking toward the empty observer seats as though waiting for his reaction. By the time I finished, my voice felt hollow, like a stanza repeated too many times. I stepped down from the stand, body limp, breathing shallow. Outside the courtroom, the world felt different, quieter, as if holding its breath for the verdict. The sun was dropping beneath gray clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. I wandered until I came to that same cafe across the street from the studio. I ordered coffee without thinking, noticed my hands still trembled as I wrapped them around the warm cup. Each sip rattled through me, carried the taste of adrenaline and fear. I stared out the window at the empty studio doors, imagining that behind them, Mark sat in his office, staring at his empty inbox or pacing, haunted by the proof I'd laid bare. Weeks later, the judge's ruling arrived in a brief, typed notice. Mark must return all rights to me, issue public retraction, and pay damages. The legal fees would be covered partially by his assets, but I'd still face a debt I couldn't ignore. The victory felt jagged, sweet with relief, bitter with cost. I folded the notice, fingertips brushing the crease like a scar. That night, I sat at my keyboard, sheet music scattered around me, and played the melody of our shared song. It felt different now, like a wounded animal, raw and trembling. My fingers found the familiar chords, but each note carried the weight of betrayal and the promise of something new. The final bar lingered, unresolved, a chord suspended in the air. I closed my eyes and let the silence fill the room. The battle was over, but the reverberations would echo through the rest of my life. In that hush, I heard my own heartbeat, steadying, reclaiming the rhythm that Mark had tried to steal. And though the path ahead was uncertain, piles of debt, bruised trust, the scars of every sleepless night, I knew this melody was mine to shape again, from ash to phoenix song. I walked back into my apartment carrying the judge's ruling like a strange talisman, cold metal that both weighed me down and kept me upright. My shoulders were stiff, spine locked in a posture of forced triumph. Every step felt heavy, as if I were wading through water. I set the papers on the kitchen counter and pressed my palms flat against the wood, tasting the grain beneath my skin. My mouth went dry and a tremor ran along my arms. In the silence that followed, I realized I hadn't cried. I hovered at the edge of tears so long ago that sadness had stiffened into something else, numb determination. I flicked on the kettle, listening to the hum of the stove and the distant rumble of traffic. Steam curled up from the mug I clutched, warm against my cold fingers. I took a slow sip, eyes half closed, feeling the last vestiges of adrenaline drain from my veins. That evening, I couldn't sleep. My mind looped through gallery images of evidence pinned on my fridge, the judge's succinct words echoing, rights returned, public apology, damages awarded. I tried to imagine Mark reading the same notice, but my chest tightened at the thought. I wondered if he was shattered, or if he'd already buried his remorse under excuses. A dull ache formed at the base of my skull as I pressed fingertips to my temples, willing the tension to ease. When dawn's pale light seeped through the curtains, I found myself in his office again, this time alone, armed with nothing but curiosity. The door was unlocked, I slipped inside and sat at his desk, the chair creaking under my weight. I rifled through drawers, not for proof now, but for understanding. My hands paused over a manila envelope labeled personal. The script was unfamiliar, shaky. I pulled it open, revealing a sheaf of crumpled letters. I unfolded the first one and read a jagged line in ink, "I'm sorry I couldn't save her." My heart lurched. Below it, scratched dates that made no sense, random days, crossed out, rewritten. Another sheet, a hospital discharge form for someone named Clara Markov, marked critical. My throat closed up. Fingers shaking, I dug out a faded photograph of a woman breathing through tubes, eyes closed against an illness I'd never heard him mention. The papers slipped from my grasp and scattered across the floor. I pressed my palm to the desk and leaned forward, breath catching. Guilt gnawed at me. All this time, I'd believed he was a monster who'd stolen my voice. But here was something darker, a man drowning in remorse, twisting the world to punish himself or seek atonement. My stomach tightened until I felt sick. I backed away, each step a trembling negotiation with my pulse. My legs quivered, as though the floor had turned to glass. I dropped to my knees and gathered the letters, reading fragments about medical bills, whispered pleas for help, threats to find money anywhere. One page ended with, "I'll do anything to keep her alive." A jagged edge of empathy cut through the anger I'd carried. Suddenly I saw the strain in his smiles, the weight behind his guidance in the studio. Later that day, I sat on the edge of my bed, letters spread around me like broken petals. My eyes stung as I revisited every promise he'd made, every encouraging word that now felt tinged with desperation. A tear slid down my cheek, hot and unwelcome. My jaw locked, lip trembling, as I wrestled with a new conflict. I could destroy him for what he did to me, or I could, maybe, see him not as a villain but as someone driven beyond reason by love and fear. I closed my eyes and pressed the letters to my chest. My heartbeat thudded, a raw rhythm echoing in the hush of the room. I thought of my songs, once stolen and now reclaimed, and wondered if mercy had a place in this score. My breath hitched, and I realized that revenge, legal or otherwise, had been only half my journey. The other half was the reckoning with everything I'd learned, that people fracture under pressure, that sin and sacrifice can look frighteningly alike. I rose and walked to the piano in the corner, the instrument gathering dust since my return from court. My fingers hovered over the keys, knuckles white with tension. I took a breath that rattled in my chest, then began to play, a hesitant, ragged melody that wound through minor chords and major hopes. Each note trembled with guilt and resolve, pulling me towards something neither triumph nor tragedy, but an uneasy truce. In that fragile music, I found a pathway forward, one that honored the scars we both carried. The ending remained unwritten, the final chord suspended in the air. And for the first time since it all began, I felt the story's river bend towards something uncharted, flowing not just from betrayal to revenge, but toward understanding that even the deepest wound can carry the seed of something new. A week later, I found myself back at the studio, but not as an intruder this time. The door stood slightly ajar, the same pale welcome I'd once taken for granted. My heart thudded, a slow, cautious drum, as I pushed it open and slipped inside. The console lights glowed softly in the dim room, and the air smelled of coffee, cables, and lingering regret. I carried the sheaf of his letters in one hand and my phone in the other. Each crumpled page was a confession, pleas for help, threats scraped against the edges of panic, apologies jagged with raw ink. I laid them out on his desk, edges overlapping like fallen leaves. My palms felt slick, but my fingers shook less than I'd expected. This time I wasn't here to gather proof, I was here to offer understanding. Mark? I called, voice softer than I'd anticipated. The name felt strange on my tongue, both an accusation and an olive branch. Silence answered me, but not empty silence, more like the hush before a storm breaks, full of potential. He appeared in the doorway a moment later, shoulders hunched, expression unreadable. His eyes widened when he saw the letters spread across his desk. Elena, he said, voice thick. He didn't step forward, didn't reach for them. He just stood there, as though afraid to disturb the fragile piece of paper and confession. I took a breath, feeling the tremor in my chest. I read them, I said, each word deliberate. Every single line. I hovered over the desk, fingertips grazing the top letter without touching it. I saw why you did it. My voice caught on the last word, but I held my ground. He swallowed, eyes flicking from the letters to me. His jaw worked silently. Finally he spoke. Didn't want you to hate me before you knew. The admission sounded small in the cavernous room, but it echoed like a hammer against steel. I closed the distance between us and set my hand atop his on the desk, right over the top letter. His fingers twitched, and I felt his pulse thrum beneath my palm. I did hate you, I whispered. But I also felt something else when I read your words. I lifted the corner of the envelope. Mercy. And I wondered if you ever felt forgiveness could save you. His shoulders sagged, as if relief and shame collided in one tide. He exhaled, and the tension in his frame loosened. I didn't know how to ask, he said, voice small. I thought taking your songs was the only way to afford her care. I thought, if I sacrificed us both, at least she might live. The weight of his confession pressed against my ribs. My breath came out in a shaky exhale. She's gone, I said softly, the truth bitter on my tongue. But your actions echo long after. I lifted my hand, fingertips brushing the faded hospital discharge form tucked inside one letter. I lost nights of sleep fighting you in court, reliving every lie. But I don't want to keep fighting. He drew in a shaky breath. What do you want from me? His question was raw, honest, no theatrics, no rehearsed defense. I studied him, the man who'd been my champion and my betrayer. My throat tightened with the memory of his warm encouragements, now tinged with desperation. I want us to finish what we started, I said. But this time, together. I stacked the letters neatly and passed them back to him, fold by fold, as though offering a lifeline. He accepted them, holding the breeze of my fingertip across the top page as though it might sting. Together, he echoed, voice ragged. He pushed to his feet and gathered the letters, tucking them into a folder. Then, without a word, he stepped behind the console and powered it up. I stood by the piano, watching his silhouette through the glass panel. The red record light blinked on the board. He adjusted a few knobs, then turned and offered me the headphone jack. I slipped it on, heart fluttering as I heard the faint hum of a new track, my voice, once stolen and returned, echoing over a simple piano line. He nodded at me. Your turn. My fingers hovered above the keys, muscles still humming with tension. I closed my eyes, inhaled, and pressed the first chord. As the note resonated through the speakers, I let the tremor in my hands settle into purpose. He reached over to cue the recorder, eyes bright with nerves and hope. We began to play, a tentative duet of keys and soft hums, building into harmonies neither of us could have crafted alone. The melody unfolded slowly, weaving in the ache of betrayal and the tentative glow of reconciliation. Every misstep we corrected together, every pause we filled with understanding. When the last chord faded, the studio felt charged, as though our combined breath still lingered in the air. I removed the headphones, and Mark met my gaze. No words were needed, the shared silence said everything. In that quiet, I realized the river of our story had curved back toward possibility. Ahead lay work hours filled with uncertainty, honest conversations, and perhaps the risk of fresh wounds. But as I packed up my notebook and he cleared the console, we both carried the same fragile warmth, a shared melody born from the pain, now guiding us forward, together. Morning dew clung to the pavement as we stepped away from the studio, our shoes scuffing small chalky marks on the concrete. The skin on my cheeks felt tight in the cool air, and I tugged my coat collar higher, though the chill inside me ran deeper than any breeze. Mark walked beside me, his steps careful, as if he thought the ground might crack beneath us. We didn't speak, but the silence between our words held something like peace, a fragile truce earned through confessions and late-night melodies. We reached the corner cafe where we'd first plotted our comeback, the sign's faded paint making it feel as much memory as place. I opened the door and let the warmth hit me first, steaming espresso machines, cinnamon in the air, the soft murmur of early patrons. Mark followed, hesitating at the threshold, chest rising and falling in anxious rhythm. I caught his eye and nodded, gesturing to a small table by the window. He exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. As we sat, I unwrapped 2 croissants and placed them between us. The flaky pastry smelled like home. Mark ordered 2 coffees, the way he always had, black with a splash of cream, and for a moment, I remembered why I'd trusted him in the first place. But memory was a fickle friend. It reminded me of summer evenings and rehearsals that ended with laughter, and also of the lie he'd built around my music. I tore off a crisp edge of croissant and bit down, savoring the warmth. My hands still trembled slightly, even after days of collaboration. I kept them close to my body, as though protecting my own nerve endings. Mark watched me, eyes furtive. I looked away, gazing out the window at the river's slow current, steady, relentless, indifferent. He cleared his throat. I found something, he said quietly, sliding a folded receipt across the table. His handwriting curled around the margin, pharmacy, for treatments. I unfolded it, small numbers, an unfamiliar date, a total that looked modest. You never told me about this, I said, voice low. My pulse thundered in my ears. Why is that? He stared at the receipt as if it burned him. His jaw clenched, and for a heartbeat I feared he'd retreat behind silence again. Then he met my gaze. I didn't want you to pity me, he whispered. I thought if I kept it from you, I could protect you, and myself. His voice cracked. I could see the weight of late-night calls, of trying to swallow guilt and fear all at once. My chest constricted. I pressed a hand to my throat, feeling its rapid flutter. Pity isn't the worst thing, I said softly. Dishonesty is. I picked up my coffee, hand steadying on the warm cup. I need the truth, even if it's ugly. He nodded, shame and relief pooling in his eyes. She's getting worse, he confessed. And treatments cost more than I thought I could cover it by releasing your songs under E. Johnson, just long enough to pay her bills. His confession landed in my gut like a stone. I wrapped my other hand around my coffee, feeling the heat seep into my fingers. The cafe grew quiet around us as I absorbed his words. The tremor that had once been panic shifted into something else, sorrow, and an ache of understanding. I exhaled, tasting coffee and forgiveness. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said, voice steady. "But knowing why, helps." I placed my cup down and reached across the table, fingertips brushing his. He looked at my hand as though unsure it belonged to him. I squeezed once, then withdrew. "Let's finish this song right," I said. "No secrets." He swallowed, glancing at the receipt again before tucking it into his jacket pocket. "No secrets," he agreed, voice firmer. We left the cafe together, the river glinting beside us as though shining with possibility. Back at the studio, I watched Mark power up the console, the red light on the recorder blinking. My heart tightened as I took my place at the piano bench. The final act of trust was playing notes without fear that he'd disappear again. I closed my eyes, placed my fingers on the keys, and pressed the first chord. In that moment, betrayal and mercy intertwined in the melody, a harmony born from broken dreams and fragile hope. When Mark brought in the vocals, his voice trembled beside mine, but neither of us flinched. We played as one, letting the notes carry us beyond regret and into something new, a song that bore the weight of both our scars and our resolve. In the hush of the studio, I realized we were not perfect. We were simply honest, and that honesty felt like redemption. The next morning, the air in the studio felt thick, almost humid, with unspoken questions. I stepped inside before Mark arrived, the dim glow of standby lights casting long shadows across the mixing desk. The faint scent of stale coffee lingered, mingling with the sharp tang of cables. I hesitated at the threshold, my pulse fluttering like the wings of a frightened bird. Whatever peace we'd patched together over croissants and confessions in the cafe now felt fragile, as though one wrong note might shatter it all. I walked to the console and tapped the record button, listening to the hum of the room. My reflection in the glass window looked tense, eyes wide, shoulders curved inward. I reminded myself we'd agreed on total honesty, no more secrets. Still, a quiver of doubt crawled up my spine. What if I'd misread his remorse? What if trust was just another melody he could twist? Mark arrived a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He gave me a tentative smile that didn't quite reach his gaze. "Morning," he said softly. I nodded, voice stuck in my throat. He set down 2 mugs of coffee, black, no sugar, and placed them beside me. The steam curled upward like a fragile peace offering. We spent the next hour reviewing our latest take, my vocals layered over his piano chords, interwoven with subtle string arrangements. Each playback felt like stepping onto thin ice. When Mark reached to adjust the EQ, I flinched. He paused, hands suspended in the air. "Sorry," he murmured, lowering his arm. Muscle memory. The apology struck me like a discordant chord. But I forced a nod and picked up my notebook. We dove into the session, tweaking levels, re-recording a few vocal runs, and experimenting with harmony lines. The music grew richer, each layer revealing something new, nuance, vulnerability, the echo of shared pain. For a moment, I lost myself in the sound, and the knot of suspicion loosened just enough for me to breathe. But every time I caught Mark watching me, a flutter of unease stirred again. Around midday, we paused for lunch. I unpacked a simple salad, Mark ate a granola bar, eyes darting between me and the door. I leaned forward, voice low. "You okay?" He sighed, dropping his gaze to the floor. "I got an email last night." He pulled his phone from his pocket and handed it to me. The subject line read, "Uncredited leak, Elena and Hartley session clip." I tapped it open. Embedded in the message was a short video, our track playing in the background, but the on-screen caption credited only to Hartley Productions. The upload date was early hours of the morning, time-stamped while we slept. My blood ran cold. I stared at the black and white watermark stamped on the bottom corner, Mark's logo. His face went pale. "I didn't post it," he said quickly. I swear. But his voice wavered. I closed the video and handed the phone back. Who did? I whispered. He rubbed his temples. I don't know. Someone with access, I guess. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might rupture my ribs. The water in my mug trembled. All morning I'd scaled back the tremor in my body, had convinced myself we were past this, but here it was again, betrayal bleeding through the seams. This isn't just a mistake, I said, voice shaking. You promised. No more surprises. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes haunted. I know. I'm sorry. He looked at me, earnest and broken. I'll fix it. We'll get it taken down. I swallowed, tasting salt and disappointment. You need to find out who did this, I said. And why? My breath caught. Or I can't keep doing this. He nodded, determination flickering in his gaze. I'll figure it out. He stood and strode to the console, fingers flying over the keyboard as he pulled up server logs and share histories. I retreated to the corner of the room, folding my arms, chest tight with dread. 30 minutes later, he turned to me, exhaustion etched into his features. It wasn't me, he said, voice hoarse. Someone used my credentials, probably a ghost user on the admin list. It'll take time to trace. I exhaled, a shaky release of tension. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers. Another part felt hollowed by relief that it wasn't his betrayal this time. But the damage was done. All right, I said quietly. Let's lock everything down. New passwords, limited access. He nodded and set to work. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of technical fixes and tense silences. With every click, I watched him, searching for signs of deceit. But he simply focused on the screen, brows furrowed, as though fighting a phantom that threatened our fragile collaboration. By evening, we had reinforced every portal, changed every credential, and set up notifications for unauthorized logins. The studio felt different, secure, yes, but colder, less welcoming. We sat in exhausted silence, the faint glow of monitors the only light. Finally, I gathered my things. I'm going home, I said, voice hollow. He looked up, alarm flickering. Please don't go, he pleaded. I need you here. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. The room bristled with our shared history, trust broken and rebuilt, only to be fractured again. I turned back, eyes meeting his. I'm not sure this river can carry us any further, I whispered. Then I left, the door clicking shut like final punctuation. Outside, the night air was crisp, indifferent. As I walked away, each step echoed in the silent streets, and I realized that sometimes forgiveness isn't enough to bridge every breach. The river of our story had twisted into unknown currents, and I wasn't certain I would stay afloat. I walked down the deserted street, the echo of the studio door clicking behind me still ringing in my ears. Each footstep felt heavier than the last, as if the pavement absorbed my doubt. The night sky was a blanket of stars, indifferent to my turmoil. My coat hung loosely from my shoulders, the collar turned up against a chill I didn't fully feel. I stopped at the curb and stared into the reflective surface of a rain-lashed window. In the glass, I saw my own eyes, dark and haunted, surrounded by shadows. A tremor ran through my limbs, and I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms until they went numb. The city's hum murmured in the distance, cars passing like whispers. I raised my hand and brushed my fingertips across the window's fogged edge. The glass left a blurred trail, like a fingerprint of my own presence. Behind me, the streetlight flickered, and I imagined Mark standing under its glow, desperate to prove himself, capable of betrayal yet in need of absolution. I tasted salt in my mouth, tears I hadn't noticed falling. My heart pounded, each beat a warning that trust could fracture again. I swallowed hard, voice caught in my throat. I needed space. I turned away and walked toward the river, the water's dark ribbon gleaming under the moonlight. At the railing, I placed both hands on the cool metal and leaned forward. The current rushed below, relentless and unsparing. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill my senses. Liquid urgency, echo of time slipping. My fingers trembled on the railing. I could feel the metal vibrating, as if the river itself was alive. My breath faltered, and a wave of vertigo threatened me. I tightened my grip and forced myself upright. After a moment, I exhaled, and the dizziness eased. I moved along the embankment until I found a quiet bench. I sat, curling my body into a smaller shape, head bowed. In my lap lay the half-finished lyric notebook I carried everywhere. I opened it to a blank page and let my pen hover. The silence enveloped me, and the only sound was the river's pulse. I pressed the pen to paper and wrote 2 words, "I choose me." The phrase stung with truth. Beneath it, I scrawled, "If trust is fragile, my art can still stand alone." My hands still shook, but the act of writing grounded me. Each stroke steadied my mind. I closed the notebook and tucked it into my coat pocket. I reached for my phone and called Sarah. It rang 3 times before her voice came through, warm and concerned. "Elena?" she asked. My voice was raw. "I'm at the river." I heard her inhale. "I'll be there." I ended the call and rested my forehead against the cool wood of the bench. The stars winked above, vast and silent witness. I imagined my own song rising from this moment, a solitary melody unbound by compromise. Minutes later, Sarah appeared, her face gentle in the lamplight. She sat beside me without speaking, offering her presence like a lifeline. We watched the water flow past, and she slipped her hand into mine. Her grip was steady. I turned to her, voice trembling. "I can't go back, not until I know what I'm fighting for." She nodded, understanding. "Then fight for yourself first," she said. Her words were soft but firm, like a bass note anchoring a song. I closed my eyes and let her words settle. The river below no longer felt like a threat but a symbol of my own journey, unpredictable, deep, and capable of carving new paths. When I opened my eyes, I saw clarity where there had been only doubt. I lifted my head, shoulders uncoiling. "I choose me," I repeated, and Sarah smiled, relief washing over her. We stood and walked away from the railing together, the river's murmur fading behind us. Each step felt lighter, and the tremor in my limbs subsided to a steady rhythm. I knew the road ahead was still uncertain, sleepless nights, negotiations, perhaps a new solo path, but I carried a promise that no one could steal. My voice would remain mine. As we reached the end of the path, the river glinted one last time before turning away, and I followed its course toward whatever came next. In the studio the next morning, I slipped in before anyone else, the door clicking softly behind me. The console lights glowed in welcome, like eyes opening after a long sleep. I paused in the threshold, inhaling that familiar scent of leather, coffee stains, and electricity. My heart thudded, steady now, not frantic, and I realized I'd come here not to rebuild with Mark but to reclaim my space first, to remember why I fought so hard. I crossed to the grand piano tucked in the corner and ran my fingers along its dusty edge. Clouds of memories swirled, sleepless nights crafting melodies, Mark's encouraging nods that later curdled into betrayal. But this morning, I struck a chord, full, resonant, pure. The sound shook the dust loose, and I closed my eyes, letting the vibration wash through me. My hands responded, spreading into a simple progression I'd sketched by the river, rising, minor to major, echoing lost turning toward hope. After playing through that motif a dozen times, I moved to the mixing desk. I loaded our latest demo and listened critically, jotting quick notes in my notebook, phrases like, "Bring vocals forward here," "Trim echo," "Soften strings at bridge." My handwriting was neat, intentional. No one had touched these controls but me. Each tweak felt like a small stitch in the wound, pulling the edges together. When I hit play after adjustments, the track breathed differently, more of me, less of anyone else's fingerprints. The chair creaked as Sarah slipped in behind me, her presence a quiet comfort. She didn't speak at first, she just handed me 2 coffees, black with a touch of cream. I smiled, fingers still on the fader. "Needed?" I asked, voice low. She nodded, eyes bright. Always. I took a sip and tasted warmth, not just the coffee but the support threaded through her gesture. I turned back to the console and resumed work, more confident than I'd felt in weeks. By noon, I'd reworked the entire first half of the song solo, vocals layered just right, piano chords clear and unguarded, strings that didn't threaten to drown the melody. Sarah sat beside me, occasionally pointing out a frequency that felt harsh or a drum hit too brittle. We slipped into an easy rhythm, a partnership forged not by desperation but by genuine collaboration. Her suggestions felt like invitations, not commands, and I welcomed each one. When I finally leaned back, the track was unrecognizable as the one Mark had first stolen. It was rawer, more intimate, my voice breathing between notes, the piano's resonance carrying every tremor of memory. I closed my eyes and let it play out, letting the hush that followed its last echo fill the room. My spine straightened, and I sat taller in the chair, feeling the weight lift. Sarah reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "This is you," she said simply. I swallowed hard, warmth pooling in my chest. "I am me," I whispered. No qualifiers, no apologies. Just truth. We saved the session under a new file name, Elena_acclaimed. The title was both ceremony and declaration. I glanced at the clock, time to meet Mark for the label review. My stomach fluttered, but instead of dread, I felt anticipation. I was ready to face him now, with this new track as proof of my vision. As I packed up my notebook and powered down the console, I imagined the look on his face when he heard this version. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition, that I had emerged from betrayal not broken, but whole and unafraid. The river of my story had carved this path through stone and ash, and now I stood on solid ground, ready to sing my own name into the currents beyond. That night, I lay in bed replaying every moment of the showcase, how the spotlight had warmed my skin, how applause had sounded like waves breaking against a shore I never thought I'd reach again. My pillow was damp where tears had fallen, and my body ached from the adrenaline crash, muscles recalling every chord I'd struck. Sleep felt like a distant promise I wasn't sure I deserved. At dawn, I pushed aside the sheets and sat on the edge of the mattress, feet touching cold floorboards. The room smelled of stale air and leftover coffee. I rubbed my palms together until they were warm enough to cradle a mug. I poured tea from the kettle, watching steam curl like an exhale, and stared at the blank wall across from me. In the hush, I could still hear echoes of cheering, my name shouted into an audience that believed in me. I dressed slowly, choosing a simple blouse and jeans, because today I had meetings with the label and a small press interview. My heartbeat fluttered like bird wings when I thought of facing cameras again. The memory of the defamation suit, the courtroom lights, the hush of the judge's bench, all that dread still clung to my spine. But I pressed my shoulders back, reminding myself who I was now, a composer who'd reclaimed her voice, no longer silenced by fear. I slipped a binder of the reclaimed track into my bag, polished stems, vocal mixes, final master, and left my apartment into the pale morning light. The city felt quieter than usual, as if still recovering from one of its storms. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the label's office address. My fingers tapped the leather seat for the entire ride, a staccato beat of nerves and determination. In the lobby, the receptionist greeted me with a smile I couldn't quite match. I checked in and took a seat among other artists and executives, some familiar faces from the court hearing, others I'd never met. The hum of small talk filled the air, congratulations, cautious praise, questions about my next steps. I pressed the binder against my chest, tasting nervous sweat at the back of my throat. When my name was called, I stood, heart drumming against my ribs. The meeting room was sleek and too bright, a long table flanked by chairs. Executive faces watched me as I entered, folders open, pens poised. I took the seat at the head, an odd power shift that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I set the binder on the table and settled my hands on its cover. My palms were warm, still trembling slightly. "Thank you for coming in," said the A&R director, her tone polite but keen. "We've all heard the track, and frankly, we're blown away." My chest tightened at her words, validation still stung with disbelief. She flipped through the pages of my session notes and bobbed her head. Your control of dynamics, the raw emotion in your performance, it's exactly what the market needs right now. My fingers gripped the binder. I had to swallow twice before answering. Thank you. I wanted it to feel honest, unfiltered. My voice carried across the table, sounding steadier than I felt. They asked about the timeline, when I could finalize artwork, shoot a video, go on tour. I jotted notes, heart fluttering with the thrill of planning. Each question was a reminder that I was back in the game, but on my terms. At one point, the legal counsel cleared his throat and asked about any pending issues. My pulse thudded, but I replied clearly, the court ruling is final. All rights have reverted to me, and there are no ongoing disputes. The room exhaled, pen scribbling agreement. After an hour of logistics, the director leaned back, a rare smile brightening her features. Elena, we're excited to support you. Let's make sure your story reaches every listener who needs it. I nodded, emotion prickling behind my eyes. I felt the binder loosen in my grip, my fingers unfurling as though releasing a held breath. Leaving the office, I stepped into afternoon sun, the warmth like a benediction. I called Sarah, voice catching when she answered. It went well, I managed. Her cheer crackled through the line, and I let myself smile fully for the first time that day. Later, I arrived at the small studio booked for my press acoustic session. The space was intimate, exposed brick walls, a single mic stand, a stool. I set up my keyboard while the photographer and videographer adjusted lights. My palms were slick again, but this time I welcomed the flutter. It reminded me I was alive, creating rather than merely surviving. I took the stool, placed my hands on the keys, and looked into the camera's lens for a moment. It felt like meeting an old friend, one who had witnessed my entire journey. I closed my eyes, inhaled, and pressed the first chord. My voice emerged soft but unwavering, carrying the resonance of every act I'd lived through, the betrayal, the courtroom, the forgiveness. As the last note faded, the camera clicked, lights dimmed, and a hush fell. Then a soft round of applause from the tiny crew, genuine and full of wonder. Walking home that evening, the city lights glimmered like distant promises I now felt strong enough to trust. My reflection in shop windows showed a woman both scarred and unbowed. I pressed my hand to the glass, fingertips humming with warmth. The river of my story had carried me through tumult, and today it had delivered me to a new shore, one mapped by my own resilient melody. When dawn finally came, I found 2 voicemails waiting on my phone. The first was from Aurora Records, that small indie label that had reached out after the showcase. Their A&R rep's voice was warm, tinged with excitement. Elena, we'd love to talk numbers and next steps, she said, outlining an offer to finance your next singles production. My chest tightened at the promise, studio time, a modest advance, radio promo. But then came the fine print, recoupable costs, a 5-year rights hold. I replayed it twice, humidity pooling on my forehead. It sounded like salvation and a trap rolled into one. The second message was from Mark. His tone was hesitant, almost sheepish. Hey, Elena. I heard about the label offer. I want to help, totally on your terms. I ran some cost projections for studio time at Meridian Studios, where rates are lower. No strings attached. Whenever you want to meet, just let me know. My heart stuttered. Him, again. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over delete. But something in his voice, an earnestness I hadn't heard in months, stopped me. I held the phone against my chest, the weight of choices pressing down. Over my mug of lukewarm green tea, I drafted an email to Aurora Records. I thanked them for the offer, asked if we could tweak the recoupable clause to a break-even cap rather than unlimited recovery. I apologized for the delay, my fingers tapping each sentence with care. When I hit send, relief and terror tangled in my stomach. One project would be on its way, the other, a conversation I wasn't sure I was ready for. Later that morning, I called Mark first. The line clicked, he answered on the 3rd ring. Elena, he said, voice bright but nervous. Thanks for getting back. My pulse fluttered. I'm thinking about your proposal, I said. But I'd like to sit down and go over the numbers together. He exhaled, a sound of genuine relief. Of course. Tomorrow at the cafe on Pine? 10. I agreed, hanging up with my hands clasped around the phone. That afternoon, I revisited my budget spreadsheet, travel, gear rentals, mixing and mastering fees. The numbers swirled in front of me, each row another hurdle. I added Mark's proposed studio block, 5 days at Meridian, engineer on retainer. Even with his discount, it was a chunk. I scribbled crowdfund in the margins, underlining it twice. The thought of asking fans for support both thrilled and terrified me. But I reminded myself, I'd come too far to let finance dictate my art. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. The place smelled of roasted beans and seriousness. Mark was already there, hunched over a latte and his laptop, eyes downcast. I slid into the seat opposite him. He looked up, offering a tentative smile that made my chest ache. I placed my tablet on the table, a copy of my rough budget. Here, I said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. Walk me through your estimate. He nodded, tapping the screen. Meridian gives us a block rate of X per day, he pointed to the first line. Engineer fee Y per session. Mastering Z. I've included a 10% buffer for unexpected costs, microphone failures, extra mix revisions. He met my gaze, sincerity clear. I can cover half up front, he offered. You fund the rest. My breath caught. Why are you doing this? I asked softly. His eyes flicked down. I owe you that much, he said. And I want you to have the freedom to create, without me stealing another note. Tears welled unexpectedly. The gesture wasn't grand, but it was right. I tapped the crowdfund line. What if we launch a small campaign, I whispered, offer demo tracks, behind-the-scenes content, a private live stream for supporters. His face brightened. I can help set it up, my connections in fan communities. Relief and hope swirled in my chest like a new melody. Let's do it, I said. We spent the next hour refining the plan, campaign goal, reward tiers, timelines synced with the label's release schedule. Mark pulled up his phone and added notes to my document, his handwriting precise and careful. Every so often, our hands brushed as we reached for the same line of text, and I felt a spark of the old trust flicker anew, tinged now with caution and forgiveness. When we finally packed up, the cafe's morning rush had quieted. I folded the paper and tucked it into my notebook. Thank you, I said, meaning it more deeply than I'd expected. He nodded, a small smile of encouragement. We'll make sure this track is yours, completely and truly. Outside, the sun warmed the pavement as we parted ways. I slipped my notebook into my bag, heart humming with purpose. The river of my story had widened, banking me toward new opportunities, and I was ready to navigate its waters with both caution and courage, reclaiming my voice not just in courtrooms or studios, but in every listener's ear. Morning light filtered through my curtains, soft and insistent, as though the world was nudging me awake. I lay there for a long minute, listening to my own breath, steady, deliberate, before finally swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark but humming with pending tasks. I sat up, fingertips tracing the ripples in the wood grain, and reminded myself, today, we launch. I dressed quickly, choosing comfortable jeans and a simple tee, nothing flashy, because this campaign would be about authenticity, not glamour. In the kitchen, I brewed strong coffee and opened my laptop. The crowdfunding page lay ready, a clean layout with our campaign video front and center, followed by tiers of rewards, digital downloads, behind-the-scenes clips, handwritten lyric sheets, even a private livestream Q&A. My heart fluttered as I reviewed the description one last time, a concise narrative of betrayal, legal battles, and ultimate reclamation of my voice. Mark's email had arrived early. I'm at Meridian. Let me know when you're live. I paused over the publish button, vision blurring as the weight of everything pressed in. This was more than money, it was my story, laid bare for strangers to judge and support. I took a shaky breath, pressed publish, and exhaled so hard my chest rattled. The page flickered from draft to live, and suddenly the world had access to our plea. Almost immediately, notifications pinged, a handful of small pledges, 20, 50, $100, from fans and friends who had followed my journey. Each new backer felt like a spark of solidarity, warming the chill of doubt that lingered in my chest. I scrolled through the comments. Can't wait to see you rise again. Your strength is inspiring. I'm in for the vinyl reward. Keep going. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wasn't done fighting yet. By mid-morning, Mark joined me via video call, his studio backdrop behind him. He looked tired but determined. We've hit 20% of the goal, he announced, voice bright enough to crack through the speaker. He held up his phone, notifications lighting up like confetti. I grinned even as my stomach churned. This is incredible, I said, folding my hands in my lap. Let's push the mid-campaign stretch goal, maybe an acoustic EP. He chuckled, nodding. I've drafted some ideas already. We spent the next hour brainstorming updates, a short behind-the-scenes montage from Meridian Sessions, a live-streamed Q&A announcement, a mini contest for backers to vote on cover art concepts. Each idea felt like adding bricks to a bridge, connecting me to the people who believed in my comeback. As we talked, I felt my confidence rebuild, note by note. In the afternoon, I recorded a quick, unpolished video, me at the piano, playing the song's opening motif and speaking directly to the camera. Thank you so much for backing this project, I said, voice steady. Your support isn't just funding studio time, it's restoring my faith. I uploaded it as a campaign update, fingers trembling as I hit post. The response was immediate, a rush of thumbs up emojis, heartfelt comments, new pledges. Later, I met Sarah at the River Cafe to show her the progress. The table outside caught golden light, and she greeted me with a hug. I slid my phone across the table, and she tapped through the campaign page, eyes wide. Look at this. I beamed. We watched the thermometer climb toward 50% of our goal. Sarah reached across and squeezed my hand. You did this, she said. All of this. I let her words sink in, feeling the tremor in my chest transform into a steady rhythm. Back home that evening, I compiled a list of tasks for the next day, schedule the live stream, finalize EP tracklist, set up the vote poll. My apartment was scattered with notebooks and shot lists and printed screenshots of campaign pledges, a chaotic mosaic of hope. I paused to look around, realizing this space had borne witness to my darkest moments and was now cradle to my revival. As midnight approached, I sat at my piano, playing the opening chords of our song softly. Outside, the city lights glittered like distant milestones we'd yet to reach. I closed my eyes and let the music fill the room, each note a promise. Betrayal had shaped me, but it would not define me. The crowdfunding thermometer glowed on my laptop, a testament to collective faith. Tomorrow, we'd cross 60%. And beyond that? The river of my story would flow onward, unstoppable now, carrying my reclaimed voice into every corner it touched. The following morning, the city stirring to life beyond my window, I felt the campaign's momentum in every corner of my apartment. My phone buzzed with push notifications, new pledges, comments, messages of encouragement, and for the first time in months, I didn't flinch at each ping. Instead, I welcomed them, a steady tide lifting me higher. I stretched, then slid into my studio clothes, worn jeans and a soft sweater that smelled faintly of coffee. Downstairs, Sarah was already at the keyboard, sketching piano chords against a blank page. She looked up and grinned. 45%, she announced, tapping the tablet in her hand. And climbing. I crossed the room in 2 strides, wrapping her in a quick hug. Her energy was contagious. We spent the morning finalizing the acoustic EP tracklist for our mid-campaign stretch goal. Each song choice felt symbolic, the stripped-down demo of the first stolen track, the confession melody I'd composed post-lawsuit, a new piece born from the letters I'd discovered in Mark's office. We wanted backers to feel every stage of my journey. I pressed record on my phone as Sarah played the opening chords of Riverbend, the new composition where sorrow resolves into something gentler. By midday, Mark joined us over video call, the Meridian studio lights glowing behind him. He lifted his coffee mug in salute. "Ready for the live stream rehearsal?" he asked. I swallowed my nerves and nodded. "Let's do it." We synced our schedules and set up the streaming platform. I arranged my keyboard near the window so the river gleamed in the background. Sarah and I ran through the Q&A script, me answering questions about betrayal and how I'd reclaimed my voice, Sarah stepping in to explain the technical side of the crowdfunding. Then we tested the mini-concert segment, 3 songs, including a new finale I hadn't yet performed for anyone. When rehearsal wrapped, I muted my mic and closed my eyes. My palms were slick, heart fluttering, but the floor beneath me felt solid. I took a deep breath and whispered, "I choose me," the same words I'd scrawled by the river weeks ago. That promise had carried me this far, and it felt as true as ever. That evening, as the campaign hit 55%, I tipped back in my chair and scribbled in my notebook, "One more day until we hit 60. The final push felt within reach. I closed my laptop and went for a walk along the riverside path, the cool air crisp against my cheeks. Every so often, a cyclist whizzed by or a dog walker paused to let their pet drink from the water's edge. The river flowed on, indifferent to my campaign, but I imagined its current cheering me forward. Back home, I brewed chamomile tea and lit a single candle at my desk, soft light to coax calm. The live stream was set for 8 p.m. At 7:45, I sat before the camera, keyboard in view, the candle flickering beside me. Sarah settled into the corner with her tablet. Our shared glance carried reassurance. We'd done this before, and we could do it again. The live stream went live. Comments popped up instantly. "Can't wait. You've got this." So inspired. My throat tightened, but I began with a simple greeting and a brief recap of the journey. Trust broken, court battles fought, mercy extended, and now collective creation. Then I launched into the first song, the reclaimed version of my original melody. My voice was steady, carrying conviction. I felt the audience lean in through the screen. Between songs, Sarah fielded questions, some technical, some personal. One backer asked how I found the courage to forgive. I answered honestly, voice wavering. It wasn't easy, and I still carry scars. But forgiveness freed me more than it freed him. Another asked what advice I'd give to someone betrayed. I paused, thinking, write your own ending. Don't let someone else control your story. For the finale, I played Riverbend. As the chords flowed, I glanced at the river outside my window, remembering every twist and turn of this journey. The last chord lingered, and silence hung for a heartbeat before applause emojis cascaded down the chat. Sarah and I smiled through tears. After the stream ended, we updated the campaign page with the live stream recording. Overnight, pledges surged past 60%. I woke to a flurry of notifications and a message from Mark. "I watched you tonight. You were incredible. Proud of you." I replied, "Thank you, for being part of this too." That afternoon, I met Sarah for coffee by the river. We watched the thermometer edge toward 70. She nudged me, eyes bright, almost there. I nodded, chest full. One last push, video premiere, thank you notes, final live chat. She grinned and raised her mug. Later, I drafted a heartfelt update for backers, photos from the Meridian sessions, a clip of me laughing at a studio mishap, a promise that every penny would flow into production, mastering, and promotional costs. I signed off. From broken trust to shared triumph, this melody belongs to all of us. As night fell, I returned to my piano and played through the final mix one more time. The music carried echoes of every act, betrayal's sting, revenge's fire, mercy's glow, and ultimately, my own resolute voice. I pressed the last chord and let it resonate, confident that from here, the river would always carry my song forward.